What's up, dude? Back in the early 2000s, the top 4 power forwards were Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, Dirk Nowitzki, and Chris Webber. Nowadays, the first 3 are each considered to be one of the top 5 best power forwards ever. Meanwhile, poor C-webb is lucky if he gets mentioned in the top 15. Because of this, most people nowadays don't realize how nasty the dude was with the rock, so allow me to glaze. Standing at 6'10", 245 pounds with a Rodman-like 7'4" wingspan, Webber had it all. He was one of the very first big dudes who did big dude stuff, but could also put it on the floor and make plays like a guard. He was a unicorn. His handles and playmaking were some of the best ever from the power forward position. These two things, along with his dominance on the board, sturdy post hook, smooth mid-range J, and ability to finish in close with finesse or power, made him one of the sickest players of all time. Before making it to the NBA, people thought the guy was the second coming of Jesus Christ. And for good reason. By 7th grade, he was already throwing down dunks. And when he got to high school, he became the most recruited Michigan high school basketball player since Magic Johnson. During his senior year, the man-child averaged 30 points, 13 rebounds, and won National Player of the Year. Every major college basketball program drooled over him like a fat kid looking at cake. The lucky college he ended up committing to was Michigan, becoming a part of one of the greatest recruiting classes ever. He joined fellow commits Juwan Howard, Jalen Rose, Jimmy King, and Ray Jackson, forming the most iconic college basketball team ever, albeit with a slightly fruity nickname, the Fab Five. It took only a couple months into their first season for the 5 freshmen to all become starters. Their first official game as the Fabulous Five was February 9th, 1992. They played Notre Dame and ended up scoring all the team's points, winning 74-65. Although Jalen Rose would probably disagree, C-Webb was the best out of them all and showed why in that game. He stuffed the stat sheet, putting up 17 points, 11 rebounds, and 5 assists. Stat lines like that were nothing crazy to him. That's just the type of motion he had. After that game, Michigan had a record of 14-5, but with their starting lineup made up completely of children, they didn't have the experience required to compete for a championship. However, they did have the talent and skill, finishing out the regular season with a 20-8 record, entering the tournament as a 6th seed. Their matchup for the round of 64 was Temple, who they ended up beating by 7. Webber was an integral part in that win, contributing 11 points, 12 rebounds, 5 assists, 4 blocks, and 2 steals. He followed that impressive performance up with an even more impressive 30 bomb against East Tennessee State in the round of 32. The dude couldn't miss, hitting 12 of 15 from the field, propelling Michigan to a 102-90 dub and into the Sweet 16. Their next opponent was Oklahoma State. Although in the first 2 games, C-Webb was killing, in this one he got into foul trouble, resulting in very limited playing time and piss-poor contribution. He led the Wolverines to a narrow 3-point win, which matched them up against first seed Ohio State in the Elite 8. The Buckeyes gave him some trouble. Through regulation, the 2 teams were all knotted up at 63, forcing overtime, but Michigan yet again ended up coming out victorious. C-Webb had another wild night, dropping 23 points on 9 for 12 shooting, to go along with 11 rebounds and 5 blocks. One more game was all they had to win, and they'd not only be competing for a championship, but they'd be the first team to make it there with an all-freshman starting lineup. The team that stood in their way was Cincinnati, led by star guard Nick Van Exel. Through the first half, the Bearcats led by 3, but the Fab Five were too much for Nick the Quick to handle. Michigan dominated the glass and got buckets, winning by 4 points and moved on to the national championship to face off against Duke. Per usual, Duke was insanely good. They had Grant Hill, Christian Laettner, and a bunch of other future NBA players. The Fab Five had their work cut out for them. In the first half of the championship game, it was tight, but in the second half, a switch flip. Not Michigan's switch, though. The Blue Devils proceeded to put the Wolverines on their knees and throat fuck them without their consent. When the final buzzer sounded, Michigan was down 20 and Duke was celebrating their second championship in a row. As freshmen, they sadly came up short, but they decided to run it back the next year. The sophomore version of the Fab Five grew leaps and bounds from where they were the previous year. They entered the 92-93 season as the #1 team in the country, then went on a warpath all the way back to the national championship. This time they played UNC, and unlike the year prior, they didn't get throat throttled. Chris Webber went nuclear, dropping 23 points while shooting over 60% from the field. He also pulled down 11 rebounds and swatted 3 shots. The dude had a nearly perfect performance. What made it not so perfect was the part where he made quite possibly the biggest mistake of his career. It came with 20 seconds left. Michigan was down 71-73, but they had possession. According to Jalen Rose, their coach drew up a play and everyone knew it. Webber was supposed to grab the rebound, pass to Rose, who would try to get a 3. If it wasn't there, he'd swing it to Webber or a shooter on the perimeter. What actually happened was Webber grabbed the rebound and faked a timeout, even though they didn't have any. Then he short-circuited and walked, which the refs thought was chill, allowing him to gallop down the court, where he eventually got himself in a pickle and tried to call another timeout, but like I said, they had no timeouts, so UNC got technical free throws and went on to win the game. It was one of the most devastating brain farts of all time, and honestly would have been better if he just got called for the walk. The good news news is, technically it didn't actually happen. A decade later, Michigan vacated their entire 93 season as well as the one before because of a man named Ed Martin. Ed ran an illegal lottery operation that made a ton of money, and he laundered that money through Michigan's booster program so they could get good recruits. One of those recruits happened to be Weber. He was given around $280,000 between 1988 and 1993. It didn't get discovered until the late 90s, early 2000s. When it was brought to light, Michigan decided to vacate both of the Fab 5 years, essentially deleting Weber's college career. After the second national championship L, C-webb put his name into the 1993 NBA draft. His brain fart stuck out like a sore thumb, but he still ended up getting picked first by Orlando. They didn't want him though, so they sent his ass to Golden State in exchange for the third overall pick, Penny Hardaway, plus multiple future first round picks. Weber wasn't too excited about Orlando trading him because he would have been playing alongside Shaq if they hadn't. Instead, he was suiting up for Don Nelson's Warriors. The problem with that was Don Nelson was far ahead of his time and loved the idea of small, fast-paced ball. He saw C-webb as the perfect small ball 5, but C-webb had as much fun playing center as a whore does in church. He didn't want to be exiled to the paint. His game involved too many guard-like skills to just bang down low and grab boards. Plus, starting centers around that time were guys like Shaq, Hakeem, and Patrick Ewing. He was big, but those guys had too much meat. Pause. Although he hated playing center, C-webb did what Nelson wanted and played it a lot of his rookie year. He was great at it too, winning Rookie of the Year with averages of 17.5 points, 9 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 2 blocks, and a steal. The Warriors were great too, winning 50 games. The problem was C-webb wasn't happy at all and he had the power to leave. When they drafted him, they signed him to a 15-year, $75 million contract that included a player option when his first year was over. Because of this, after Charles Barkley swept them in the first round, C-webb decided he was done with the Warriors. So Golden State did a sign and trade, making him a Washington Bullet. With the Bullets, he reunited with Fab 5 teammate Juwan Howard and became a star, but the team was dog shit. He was there from 1994 to 1998, and in that time they made the playoffs once, but got swept by Michael Jordan in the first round. Because they sucked so much ass, Washington looked to move in a different direction. And on May 14th, 1998, they traded him to Sacramento, where he evolved from a star to a superstar. In that first year with Sacktown, the dude was an animal, making the All-NBA second team and leading the entire league in rebounds with an impressive 13 a night, ending Dennis Rodman's 7-year stretch as the league's rebounding leader. His dominance on the glass was a huge reason why the Kings made it to the playoffs, and they were going to need more of it in round 1. They were matched up with the Utah Jazz led by John Stockton and one of the dudes Chris Hansen missed, Karl Malone. I wish he never diddled a kid because anywhere inside the arc the dude was cash. This series was no different. He put up 24 a game and sent the Kings home in 5. At this point, C-webb was about to enter his 7th year in the league. He'd only been in the playoffs 3 times and hadn't even made it out of the first round. Every time he had gotten to the playoffs, he got molested by a Hall of Famer or two. The good news is, all those dudes who gave him trouble were getting old, and he was entering his prime on a really solid squad that was only getting better. Over the course of the next 3 seasons, the Kings went from a barely playoff team all the way to a finals contender. Each year was an improvement on the last. The 1999 to 2000 season saw them win 44 games, the next year it was 55, and the next was 61. Weber's ascension to superstar status was a main factor for this. In the 99 to 2000 season, he upped his scoring average to 24.5 points, then the next year all the way up to 27, which got him on his first and only All-NBA first team. That year, he also got his first playoff series win ever. In the first round, they destroyed the Phoenix Suns 3-1, but then the next round came and Kobe and Shaq unfortunately proceeded to spread their cheeks and non-consensually pound their hole. Although they got 40 ball after 40 ball dropped on their head and sent home, the season right after that made up for it. Kind of. Well, not really. What happened was, on June 27, 2001, Sacramento traded their exciting, flashy, young point guard White Chocolate to Vancouver, in exchange for Mike Bibby, who's all around just a better player. This was obvious pretty much right away. With Bibby running point, clamp god Doug Christie and sniper Peja Stojakovic on the wing, C-webb at the 4 and Vlade Divac down low, Sacramento became one of the best teams in the league. They dominated the regular season, finishing with 61 wins, which earned them the first seed in the West. Without C-webb, there was a 0% chance they'd have been in that position. The dude averaged 24.5 points, knocking down nearly 50% of his shots, in addition to pulling down over 10 rebounds and dishing out 4.6 assists per game. His contribution to the Kings' incredible season got him on yet another All-NBA second team, and in the playoffs, his dominance was going to continue. Round 1, the Utah Jazz stood in their way, but Stockton and the Diddler were really old. Meanwhile, Sacramento was at their peak. The series wasn't total domination by Sacktown. All the games were separated by single digits, but they ended up winning 3-1. Weber wasn't very efficient, but the next round he turned up. They played Irk and the Dallas Mavericks, who couldn't guard Weber for shit. Against them, he averaged 25 points, shooting a scorching hot 55% from the field. The two teams traded games 1 and 2, but after that, it was complete and total obliteration by Sacktown. They won the final 3 in a row thanks to Weber stepping his game up even more. In those final 3 games, his scoring jumped to 28 a night and his field goal percentage to 64%. After that, the only thing that stood in his way of a finals appearance was Bean and Diesel. It wasn't ideal, but the Kings were different that year and knew they had a chance to beat them. Lo and behold, through 5 games, the Kings led the series 3-2. One more win and they were in the finals. Unfortunately, this is where the story gets a little fucky-wucky. The Kings lost game 6, but shouldn't have. The game was allegedly rigged by the refs in favor of Los Angeles. Former NBA ref turned felon Tim Donaghy revealed that 2 of the 3 refs wanted LA to win. Those 2 refs were known to be company men. If you put 2 and 2 together, you realize it was in the NBA's interest to extend the series. The result of this was many blatantly missed calls despite the refs being in full view and a ton of undeserved free throws awarded to the Lakers. All the fouls led to the ejection of Vlade Divac, Scott Pollard, and LA extending the series. This meant there was now a game 7. I haven't mentioned it yet, but C-webb wasn't the clutchest dude and it showed in that game. In the first half, he played well, shooting 6 for 11, scoring 14 points, grabbing 4 rebounds, and dishing out 4 assists. And in the second half, plus overtime, the dude turned into Helen Keller, shooting an ice-cold 3 for 10. Without his usual production, they couldn't compete and lost in overtime. After that, everything went downhill rapidly for C-webb and the Kings. The next season, they were arguably even better than the year prior, but come playoff time, shit hit the fan. In game 2 of the semifinals on May 8th, 2003, which was actually the day I was born, Weber hurt his knee, which completely destroyed the Kings' dreams of making it to the finals. It was an injury that would sideline him for a while, and unfortunately, by the time he returned, he was a shell of his former self. This led to Sacramento trading him in February 2005 to Philly, where he regressed into a role player. Just 3 years later, his career was over. Without the rigged Game 6 and career-ending knee problems, Weber could have easily ended up as a top 6 or 7 power forward ever. Kinda like Shawn Kemp, whose career, for a multitude of reasons, was far too short than what it should have been. You can click here to watch the video I made on him. Thanks for watching this one. Hope you enjoyed. Bye.